14. Dick awoke at 5 after a long dream of war, walked to the window and stared out it at the Zuger Sea. His dream had begun in somber majesty. Navy blue uniforms crossed a dark plaza behind bands playing the second movement of Prokofiev's Love of Three Oranges. Presently there were fire engines, symbols of disaster, and a ghastly uprising of the mutilated in a dressing station. He turned on his bedlamp light and made a thorough note of it, ending with the half-ironic phrase, "Non-combatants shell shock." As he sat on the side of his bed, he felt the room, the house and the night as empty. In the next room Nicole muttered something desolate and he felt sorry for whatever loneliness she was feeling in her sleep. For him time stood still and then every few years accelerated in a rush, like the quick rewind of a film, but for Nicole the years slipped away by clock and calendar and birthday, with the added poignance of her perishable beauty. Even this past year and a half on the Zuger Sea seemed wasted time for her, the seasons marked only by the workmen on the road turning pink in May, brown in July, black in September, white again in spring. She had come out of her first illness alive with new hopes, expecting so much, yet deprived of any subsistence except Dick, bringing up children she could only pretend gently to love, guided or fans. The people she liked, rebels mostly, disturbed her and were bad for her. She sought in them the vitality that had made them independent or creative or rugged, sought in vain, for their secrets were buried deep in childhood struggles they had forgotten. They were more interested in Nicole's exterior harmony and charm, the other face of her illness. She led a lonely life owning Dick who did not want to be owned. Many times he had tried unsuccessfully to let go his hold on her. They had many fine times together, fine talks between the loves of the white nights, but always when he turned away from her into himself he left her holding nothing in her hands and staring at it, calling it many names, but knowing it was only the hope that he would come back soon. He scrunched his pillow hard, lay down, and put the back of his neck against it as a Japanese does to slow the circulation, and slept again for a time. Later, while he shaved, Nicole awoke and marched around, giving abrupt, succinct orders to children and servants. Lanier came in to watch his father shave. Living beside a psychiatric clinic, he had developed an extraordinary confidence in and admiration for his father, together with an exaggerated indifference toward most other adults. The patients appeared to him either in their odd aspects, or else as devitalized, overcorrect creatures without personality. He was a handsome, promising boy and Dick devoted much time to him, in the relationship of a sympathetic but exacting officer and respectful enlisted man. "Why," Lanier asked, "do you always leave a little lather on the top of your hair when you shave?" Cautiously Dick parted soapy lips. "I have never been able to find out. I've often wondered. I think it's because I get the first finger soapy when I make the line of my side burn, but how it gets up on top of my head I don't know. I'm going to watch it all tomorrow." "That's your only question before breakfast?" "I don't really call it a question." "That's one on you." Half an hour later Dick started up to the administration building. He was 38, still declining a beard he yet had a more medical aura about him than he had worn upon the Riviera. For 18 months now he had lived at the clinic, certainly one of the best appointed in Europe. Like Daimler's it was of the modern type, no longer a single dark and sinister building but a small, scattered, yet deceitfully integrated village. Dick and Nicole had added much in the domain of taste, so that the plant was a thing of beauty, visited by every psychologist passing through Zurich. With the addition of a caddy house it might very well have been a country club. The eglantine and the beeches, houses for those sunk into eternal darkness, were screened by little copses from the main building, camouflaged strong points. Behind was a large truck farm, worked partly by the patients. The workshops for ergotherapy were 3, placed under a single roof and their Dr. Diver began his morning's inspection. The carpentry shop, full of sunlight, exuded the sweetness of sawdust, of a lost age of wood. Always half a dozen men were there, hammering, planing, buzzing, silent men, who lifted solemn eyes from their work as he passed through. Himself a good carpenter, he discussed with them the efficiency of some tools for a moment in a quiet, personal, interested voice. Adjoining was the book-bindery, adapted to the most mobile of patients who were not always, however, those who had the greatest chance for recovery. The last chamber was devoted to beadwork, weaving and work in brass. The faces of the patients here wore the expression of one who had just sighed profoundly, dismissing something insoluble, but their sighs only marked the beginning of another ceaseless round of ratiocination, not in a line as with normal people but in the same circle. Round, round, and round. Around forever. But the bright colors of the stuffs they worked with gave strangers a momentary illusion that all was well, as in a kindergarten. These patients brightened as Dr. Diver came in. Most of them liked him better than they liked Dr. Gregorovius. Those who had once lived in the great world invariably liked him better. There were a few who thought he neglected them, or that he was not simple, or that he posed. Their responses were not dissimilar to those that Dick evoked in non-professional life, but here they were warped and distorted. One Englishwoman spoke to him always about a subject which she considered her own. "Have we got music tonight?" "I don't know," he answered. "I haven't seen Dr. Ladislaw." "How did you enjoy the music that Mrs. Sachs and Mr. Longstreet gave us last night?" "It was so-so." "I thought it was fine, especially the Chopin." "I thought it was so-so." "When are you going to play for us yourself?" She shrugged her shoulders, as pleased at this question as she had been for several years. "Some time. But I only play so-so." They knew that she did not play at all. She had had two sisters who were brilliant musicians, but she had never been able to learn the notes when they had been young together. From the workshop Dick went to visit the Eglantine and the beaches. Exteriorly these houses were as cheerful as the others. Nicole had designed the decoration and the furniture on a necessary base of concealed grilles and bars and immovable furniture. She had worked with so much imagination, the inventive quality, which she lacked, being supplied by the problem itself, that no instructed visitor would have dreamed that the light, graceful filigree work at a window was a strong, unyielding end of a tether, that the pieces reflecting modern tubular tendencies were stauncher than the massive creations of the Edwardians, even the flowers lay in iron fingers and every casual ornament and fixture was as necessary as a girder in a skyscraper. Her tireless eyes had made each room yield up its greatest usefulness. Complimented, she referred to herself brusquely as a master plumber. For those whose compasses were not depolarized, there seemed many odd things in these houses. Dr. Diver was often amused in the Eglantine, the men's building. Here there was a strange little exhibitionist who thought that if he could walk unclothed and unmolested from the Étoile to the Place de la Concorde he would solve many things, and, perhaps, Dick thought, he was quite right. His most interesting case was in the main building. The patient was a woman of 30 who had been in the clinic 6 months. She was an American painter who had lived long in Paris. They had no very satisfactory history of her. A cousin had happened upon her all mad and gone, and after an unsatisfactory interlude at one of the whoopee cures that fringed the city, dedicated largely to tourist victims of drug and drink, he had managed to get her to Switzerland. On her admittance she had been exceptionally pretty, now she was a living agonizing sore. All blood tests had failed to give a positive reaction and the trouble was unsatisfactorily catalogued as nervous eczema. For 2 months she had lain under it, as imprisoned as in the Iron Maiden. She was coherent, even brilliant, within the limits of her special hallucinations. She was particularly his patient. During spells of overexcitement he was the only doctor who could do anything with her. Several weeks ago, on one of many nights that she had passed in sleepless torture, Franz had succeeded in hypnotizing her into a few hours of needed rest, but he had never again succeeded. Hypnosis was a tool that Dick had distrusted and seldom used, for he knew that he could not always summon up the mood in himself. He had once tried it on Nicole and she had scornfully laughed at him. The woman in room 20 could not see him when he came in, the area about her eyes was too tightly swollen. She spoke in a strong, rich, deep, thrilling voice. "How long will this last? Is it going to be forever?" "It's not going to be very long now. Dr. Ladislaw tells me there are whole areas cleared up. If I knew what I had done to deserve this I could accept it with equanimity. It isn't wise to be mystical about it, we recognize it as a nervous phenomenon. It's related to the blush. When you were a girl, did you blush easily?" She lay with her face turned to the ceiling. "I have found nothing to blush for since I cut my wisdom teeth." "Haven't you committed your share of petty sins and mistakes?" "I have nothing to reproach myself with." "You're very fortunate." The woman thought a moment, her voice came up through her bandaged face afflicted with subterranean melodies. I'm sharing the fate of the women of my time who challenged men to battle. To your vast surprise it was just like all battles, he answered, adopting her formal diction. Just like all battles. She thought this over. You pick a setup, or else win a Pyrrhic victory, or you're wrecked and ruined, you're a ghostly echo from a broken wall. You are neither wrecked nor ruined, he told her. Are you quite sure you've been in a real battle? Look at me, she cried furiously. You've suffered, but many women suffered before they mistook themselves for men. It was becoming an argument and he retreated. In any case you mustn't confuse a single failure with a final defeat. She sneered. Beautiful words, and the phrase transpiring up through the crust of pain humbled him. We would like to go into the true reasons that brought you here, he began, but she interrupted. I am here as a symbol of something. I thought perhaps you would know what it was. You are sick, he said mechanically. Then what was it I had almost found? A greater sickness. That's all? That's all. With disgust he heard himself lying, but here and now the vastness of the subject could only be compressed into a lie. Outside of that there's only confusion and chaos. I won't lecture to you, we have too acute a realization of your physical suffering. But it's only by meeting the problems of every day, no matter how trifling and boring they seem, that you can make things drop back into place again. After that, perhaps you'll be able again to examine. He had slowed up to avoid the inevitable end of his thought, the frontiers of consciousness. The frontiers that artists must explore were not for her, ever. She was fine-spun, inbred, eventually she might find rest in some quiet mysticism. Exploration was for those with a measure of peasant blood, those with big thighs and thick ankles who could take punishment as they took bread and salt, on every inch of flesh and spirit. Not for you, he almost said. It's too tough a game for you. Yet in the awful majesty of her pain he went out to her unreservedly, almost sexually. He wanted to gather her up in his arms, as he so often had Nicole, and cherish even her mistakes, so deeply were they part of her. The orange light through the drawn blind, the sarcophagus of her figure on the bed, the spot of face, the voice searching the vacuity of her illness and finding only remote abstractions. As he arose the tears fled lava-like into her bandages. That is for something, she whispered. Something must come out of it. He stooped and kissed her forehead. We must all try to be good, he said. Leaving her room he sent the nurse in to her. There were other patients to see, an American girl of 15 who had been brought up on the basis that childhood was intended to be all fun. His visit was provoked by the fact that she had just hacked off all her hair with a nail scissors. There was nothing much to be done for her, a family history of neurosis and nothing stable in her past to build on. The father, normal and conscientious himself, had tried to protect a nervous brood from life's troubles and had succeeded merely in preventing them from developing powers of adjustment to life's inevitable surprises. There was little that Dick could say. Helen, when you're in doubt you must ask a nurse, you must learn to take advice. Promise me you will. What was a promise with the head sick? He looked in upon a frail exile from the Caucasus buckled securely in a sort of hammock which in turn was submerged in a warm medical bath, and upon the 3 daughters of a Portuguese general who slid almost imperceptibly toward paresis. He went into the room next to them and told a collapsed psychiatrist that he was better, always better, and the man tried to read his face for conviction, since he hung on the real world only through such reassurance as he could find in the resonance, or lack of it, in Dr. Diver's voice. After that Dick discharged a shiftless orderly and by then it was the lunch hour.